could tell employers, look, if you use our tests, we can increase the probability that you'll hire an above average employee from 50-50 to 80-20, and the economic benefit of that will be staggering. Staggering, and I'll show you the calculations that enable that sort of prediction to be made. And you might think, well, and this is what you do think if you're naive about producing something of value. You might think, well, if you can produce something that's of self-evident economic value, selling it will be a snap. And that is so wrong. You just cannot believe it. So one of the things we found, which was really mind-boggling to me, was that you could make a case that the probability that a company will use a test that predicts performance, the probability that they will use the test is inversely related to the accuracy of the test, which basically means that the less accurate tests are easier to sell. And you think, well, why the hell would that be? How in the world would it possibly be that corporations would rather buy tests that don't work than tests that do work? And that is what they do, because really what they do buy is the Myers-Briggs, right? That sells about 1 million units a year. And the Myers-Briggs has zero predictive utility with regards to performance prediction. So why do people use it? Oh, here's one reason. It doesn't hurt anybody's feelings. Everybody wins, right? And so then you think, well, do corporations really care whether or not everybody wins when they're being tested? And the answer to that is yes, much more often than you would think. So we hit all sorts of barriers. That was one. The problem with tests that work is that most of the people who take them don't do very well on them. And then the other problem is that people aren't good at statistical reasoning at all. They're really, really bad at it. And so, for example, they don't know the difference between a percentage and a percentile. So a percentage is, you know, if you get 40% on a test, it means you got 40% of the questions right. If you are at the 40th percentile in the distribution of test scores, it means that you perform better than 40% of the people. That's actually not too bad, right? But you'll think, no, that's not 40 percentile, that's 40%, and then you'll think that you failed. And so one of the things we found, for example, was that when we were marketing the tests to mid-level managers who had some say at least on whether or not they would be used, the first thing they would say is, well, I want to do the test. And the thing you say about that is, no, you don't, because this is derived statistically. You can't validate the test on the basis of your opinion about its applicability in your case. But you can't have that conversation. That isn't going to go anywhere. Because they say, well, I'd never give a test to my employees that I hadn't taken myself. It's like, okay, so then you think, well, you're a typical manager. You're going to score at the 50th percentile. You are not going to be happy about that, because you want to score at the 90th percentile, because you confuse percentiles and percentages, and also because you don't notice that if you're doing better than 50% of the managers, that's actually pretty damn good. Question. So that was often a dead starter right there. And then the other thing we'd find, this was cool too. Oh, horrible, but cool. So imagine a large corporation, and you go in and you try to make a sales pitch to someone, and maybe they're in HR, and they say, and you say to them, look, you could use these tests. If you use it for 100 people, we'll increase your bottom line by $2 million a year. You'd think people would be jumping up and down about that. And they say, well, how much does it cost? And we say, well, it doesn't matter, because the cost to benefit ratio is what you should care about, not the cost, because they would want it, say, for $9 a test. It was like, no, if you do this for each, and I'll show you the mathematics in a bit, each person that you select with this test will bring $20,000 of extra value to your company. You're not getting that for $9. And then they say, well, wait a minute, we have a budget for testing that's limited to $9 a test. They say, well, it's going to produce $30,000 a year in revenue. They say, well, that revenue goes to another branch of the company and we won't get any credit for it. We'll just get punished because we've exceeded our budget for selection. I thought, oh yeah, never expected that to come up as an obstacle. So, you know, so we had very well-designed products. They also took about 90 minutes, because we started with a full-scale neuropsychological assessment. Well, then we found out, well, the test was too long. It's like, well, what do you mean? You're going to gain $30,000 a year per employee if you use this test. It's like, no, people don't want to be tested that long. It's like, okay, so you want an accurate test that doesn't discriminate against anybody, that makes everyone feel good, that's dirt cheap, and that doesn't take any time at all. It's like, well, it took us about 15 years to build one of those after we had built the original thing that actually worked. And so even then, the process of trying to introduce it into the workplace was almost impossible. The other thing you find, if you're trying to sell to large companies, this is worth knowing, is that it's great if you can sell to a large company, because it's a large company, man. And so the potential for the sale is astronomical. But large companies are so slow, you cannot believe it. And so it might take you 3 years. First of all, you have to find who you should talk to. That's impossible, because all the people that you can talk to have no decision-making power whatsoever. So all you do is waste your time talking to them. They'll talk to you, they'll have meetings with you, but it won't matter because they don't have any decision-making power. And then you can't get access to people who have the decision-making power because they don't let you have access to them. And so that's a huge problem. And even figuring them out is a huge problem. And even figuring out that those are the people that you need to talk to is a huge problem. So that might take you 5 years just to get it through your head that you're wasting your time 95% of the time talking to the wrong people. And so then the next thing that happens, this is really comical. So let's say you do make some headway. It takes you 3 bloody years. You've made a relationship with the person. They're ready to launch it, and then they have to market it internally, and that takes them a year because they have to convince everybody to get on board. And then the corporation reshuffles, and the person that you're dealing with disappears. It's like, that happened to us. We were marketing to a very large company. We got all the way up to the CEO and ready to, this was with the future authoring program, and we were ready to launch the damn product. It took us a huge amount of time to get through all the layers, and just the week that we were going to launch it, the CEO resigned and the company's stock crashed, and that was the end of that. Bang.